Thank you. Thanks very much. I like coming to hubs. I've given talks a lot in hubs, and I always feel that wherever it is, it's a bit like home. So thanks for being willing to organize this, and thanks to all of you for coming. Originally, I was going to talk about something I've spoken about a lot, which is my thinking and writing about power and love. But Susan Spakowski gave me another title instead, which she wanted me to talk about: the stories we tell ourselves, narrative as a lever for social innovation. And I found this a very interesting title. I wasn't sure what I knew about it, but it turned out to be a very helpful exercise, and that's the kind of inspiration Susan gives all of us. You may not be aware, because she's so modest, that she is this year's winner of the European Reindeer Award for Advanced Buddhist Teaching, and I felt that this was a teaching in itself, just this assignment. So thank you for that, Susan. It was helpful framing, and it's a different way of thinking about the 20 years of work that I've been doing and the questions that I've been asking myself, and a new book which I just finished yesterday called Transformative Scenario Planning. And this is the first talk I've given on this subject, so I'm excited to see what I'll say. One way of framing or of reframing the work that my colleagues and I have been doing over the last 20 years is to ask the question: what is the nature of the relationship between our reality and our stories about our reality? So let me tell you a story. As in the introduction, I am originally from Montreal. I studied physics. I got interested in energy issues and started applying the sort of scientific or analytical training I had to energy and to forecasting what would happen to energy. And this brought me some years later to work for Shell, the oil company, at the head office in London. And Shell has a particular way of doing strategic planning for which it's quite famous, which is called scenario planning. And the essence of scenario planning is that actually it's not possible for us to forecast the future. It's just too complex, too much uncertainty, but that it's useful to tell stories not about what will happen, not about what should happen, but about what could happen. And this is a very well-developed methodology, telling alternative stories about what could happen. In Shell, it's used as a way of developing strategy. And one of my colleagues from then and still now, a poet named Betty Sue Flowers, who's worked on this scenario storytelling for a long time, said to me back then that having multiple stories about what could happen is like having multiple pairs of glasses, and that you understand that there's different glasses that we can put on and see different possibilities in the future, different possibilities in the present. And more fundamentally, or more interestingly, once we get into this habit of taking off and putting on 2 or 3 different pairs of glasses, we learn that there could be a 4th or a 5th or a 6th way of looking at what's going on. And so this idea that there are multiple lenses to think about what is going on and what could go on, and that is a tool for making our way through a complex and unpredictable world. My teacher at Shell, my boss and teacher, was a Dutchman named Kees van der Heijden, really probably the leading author on scenarios, and he said 2 things back then that have always stuck with me. He said, first of all, that in groups, he was thinking about groups in companies or organizations, but you could think about groups at any scale. there are two typical dysfunctions. One is that this fragmentation. Everybody's got a different story about what's going on, and they can't understand each other, they can't agree, they can't move forward together. The other opposite dysfunction, typical dysfunction, is groupthink. Everybody's got the same story and it's wrong. Or everybody's got the same story and it doesn't work, or it doesn't fit, or it doesn't help. And Case's point is that having having an agreed set of several scenarios, having an agreed set of multiple stories, is a very neat resolution, both to the problem of fragmentation, because you have an agreed language for talking about multiple futures, and also to the problem of groupthink, because you have multiple stories, multiple lenses to look at the world. Case's other point, which I think I've come to appreciate more over the years since then, is that the language of business, and I think you could say the language of much of social discourse, is a language of rationality. And so being able to talk about possible futures, not only in terms of hunches or wishes or dreams or visions, but in terms of logical stories about what is happening and might happen, that this is a way, this is a way to work through all the complexity. After I'd been at Shell for a few years, I joined in 1988, and in 1991 we got an unexpected phone call in our department in London from a couple of professors at the University of the Western Cape, which is is a university in Cape Town in South Africa, allied with the African National Congress, Nelson Mandela's party, which had just a year before been legalized when Nelson Mandela had been freed from prison. And these professors at this ANC-aligned university wanted to think about how South Africa could make a successful transition away from apartheid towards democracy, away from white supremacy towards equality of the races. And they had the idea that the scenario method would be an interesting way to work on that. And they called Shell to see whether there was anybody in our department who might provide methodological advice to the team. And as I was the youngest and most expendable member of the department, I was dispatched to South Africa in September 1991 to a conference center just outside of Cape Town, which is called the Montfleur Conference Center. And what I found when I got there is that Peter Leroux and Vincent Mapai from the University of the Western Cape had not chosen to organize the scenario effort the way we did at Shell, which is all people from their own party or their own university. On the contrary, they had made a brilliant leap, which is that they had chosen to compose the team that would do the scenario work out of people from all sections of South African society: opposition, establishment, black, white, left, right. And had deliberately made the team as representative as they could of the whole of the emerging social reality of South Africa. When I came from London to Cape Town to facilitate those workshops, which there were 3 of them between September 1991 and March 1992, I did what we did at Shell. I didn't know any other thing to do. That was the only way I'd ever done scenario work. So the method we used, the steps we used, was exactly the same as we had used in our corporate scenario exercises. And yet something was completely different. Something was completely different. The energy was different. The feeling was different. And it's one of these things that was so obvious that it took me a while to see. And the difference, which has really motivated me for these last 20 years, is that in Shell, we were telling stories about what could happen so as to better be able to adapt to different possible futures. So to be resilient and survive no matter what happened. The South Africans were using the same method, but with a different purpose. Not simply to adapt to what could happen, but to influence what could happen. And this, I was convinced and am convinced, was the essential or the revolutionary difference in the application of what I'm now calling adaptive scenario planning and transformative scenario planning. This was extremely interesting to me, this difference, and I became really fascinated with this way of working, that you could bring together a team of actors from a hugely fragmented and polarized social system, and they could work together not just productively, but creatively and enjoyably on not just on understanding what could happen, but on influencing what could happen. I became extremely interested in this whole transition in South Africa, this once-in-a-generation, unexpected revolution, and I also became extremely interested in the woman who was the organizer of the project, Dorothy, and I ended up resigning from Shell and emigrating to South Africa and marrying Dorothy, who is here tonight. Thank you, Dorothy. But that's not the story I want to tell you. The story I want to tell you is not the story of South Africa, but a story that I now think is more revealing of this possibility of, or this illumination of the relationship between scenarios, or between stories, between our reality and the stories we tell about our reality. The story I want to tell you tonight is of the major piece of work that I was involved in after South Africa, which was in Colombia, the South American country of Colombia, in 1996. I had moved to South Africa. I was making my living working as a consultant in South Africa and elsewhere, and I got a call from a young businessman whose name is Manuel Jose Carvajal. Carvajal is quite a well-known family in Colombia, both as a political family and a business family and a philanthropic family. And Manuel Jose had heard about the Montour scenarios and thought that maybe this was a method that could be used in Colombia. Colombia at the time, the main story about Colombia at the time, at least as I understood it in 1996, was a story above all about violence, about violent conflict. There were two huge civil wars in Colombia in the 20th century. The second one is called in history books The Violence. There was an ongoing mess of violent conflict between the army and narco-traffickers and criminal gangs and left-wing revolutionaries and right-wing paramilitaries. The Colombians will tell you that they have a large homegrown academic discipline called violentology. So it's definitely part of the story. And Manuel Jose thought that maybe this telling of stories about what could happen could provide a way out of that violence. He tried to organize a group of people to undertake such an activity, and like many, if not most, such initiatives, for a long time he did not succeed. In fact, after, I don't know, 6 months, he called me and said, Adam, I've talked to a lot of people are interested, but we really don't have any way to move forward. I think there's no way to make this happen. And I always thought it was interesting. At that moment when he abandoned hope, he called me back the next day and said, Adam, I've got it. Can you be here in 2 weeks? So it was an interesting phenomena of abandoning hope and then finding the way forward. What he had done is he had found, he had gotten a young